Well, here we have Russia. Russia's own 100% Russian-owned exporter of the Club K car. They put out this picture. What does it show? It shows a cargo container lifting up on a rail car, shooting missiles, lifting up on a semi-truck, shooting missiles, going on a freighter ship and shooting at what? U.S. aircraft. This is their picture. This is the Club K car. Looks like a normal shipping container you'd find on the back of a semi-truck or rail car. But with the push of a button or a command from a satellite, up pops 4 silos that can shoot off these cruise missiles that can be rigged with nuclear missiles, biological, or chemical. In fact, from this paper by the Center for Security Policy, we read, translations from a Russian defense journal and from a secret Iranian military handbook suggested that Russia and Iran have developed a Pearl Harbor 2.0 plan to sink the entire U.S. Navy fleet as part of a coordinated asymmetrical attack against the United States and U.S. military base around the world. The plan is to launch Russian-caliber cruise missiles from submarines, freighter ships, and Trojan Horse Club K container missile systems, intermodal cargo containers that can be smuggled into U.S. ports and moved into the U.S. interior aboard trains and semi-trucks. Folks, it gets worse. Hang on. In 2015, the Russian journal, translated National Defense, outlined a plan to, quote, hit them in their ports, end quote. Did you hear what I just said? A Russian journal, translated National Defense, outlined a plan to, quote, hit them in their ports, end quote. This is why it would be called Pearl Harbor 2.0. With caliber cruise missiles that could sink entire U.S. Navy fleets docked in ports across the United States, Europe, and the Middle East. These Club K cars can come into the U.S. with these 4 cruise missiles. They'll lift up the lid with a command, even can come from a satellite. And have they been put all over the U.S. already? In fact, some of our national enemies, the nation states that hate us, have bragged that they could strike the American people. They have said recently that they are near and close to us and could strike, that they are near and close. My friends, I've talked to active and retired intelligence people. I've talked to active military intelligence people. They have no way of knowing whether these are already here, as Russia has bragged in their defense magazines have been translated into English. Are they already here? Well, one way to get them here would be to put them through our ports. Well, what would happen if we turned our ports over to a family that was connected back to Saddam Hussein and to Russia? Listen to this. Here's a description of a TV show I did with my friend, the late Phil Haney, November 2017. Here's the description. Dr. Jaffer was Saddam Hussein's nuclear scientist and now has access to Florida's Port Canaveral cargo container terminal with a 35-year lease. Jaffer and his family own Gulftainer, a company that works in joint venture with Russian state-owned exporter of the Club K cargo container system that can conceal and then launch 4 cruise missiles from a command off a satellite. Yeah, you heard me right. Dr. Jaffer's family, he and his family, have been given a 35-year lease to Cape Canaveral in Florida and now in Wilmington, Delaware. I think that one there is 50 years. I go on to describe in the November 2017 TV show with Phil Haney, former DHS officer, Dr. Jaffer created what is called the beach ball, that is a miniaturized nuclear weapon. Dr. Jaffer has also sought help from North Korea on missile projects. The Club K container cruise missile could be fitted with nuclear, chemical, biological, or EMP weapons. Northcom NORAD officials admit that the U.S. does not have a way to track the Club K cars that may have already been brought into the U.S. and positioned around the nation. Because again, that's not the way our system was set up. It wasn't set up. It was set up to look for missiles coming from such places as the former Soviet Union. Not right off our shores that close, certainly not inside a Pearl Harbor type event. Have they already come in? Have they been moved around and stationed? Tonight on the Worldview Weekend Hour, are Russia and China preparing for war? How about this? Are they preparing for a Pearl Harbor 2.0? Tonight I will share with you screenshots from military documents coming out of Russia. This is not conspiracy, folks. It's highly documented. In fact, I'll share with you from a declassified naval intelligence document. Russia and China, they are preparing for war with the United States. In fact, our own Pentagon knows this, and they're preparing for war. Are you prepared? The Worldview Weekend Hour begins right now.
WVW-TV presents the Worldview Weekend Hour with Brannon and Howse. Whether the topic is law, science, government, economics, history, family, social issues, education, or theology. Brannon brings the issues of today into clear focus through the lens of a biblical worldview. And now, here is your host, Brannon Howse.
Good evening and welcome to the Worldview Weekend Hour. I hope you've invited your friends to join us as we're live tonight. For those of you that are catching it live, tonight is Sunday night, March 29th at 8 p.m. Central Time. Are China and Russia preparing for war? Part 2. I'm going to move very fast tonight because I really have enough content to put into 2 shows. But let me ask you this. Are China and Russia preparing for a Pearl Harbor 2.0? I'm going to share with you tonight out of this document. This is a declassified naval intelligence document. I'll also share with you out of a document or 2 that comes from Russia itself, Russian military writings, where they indeed are preparing for, well, a Pearl Harbor type event, 2.0. This is all documented, folks. Many Americans were caught off guard with the coronavirus. They were caught off guard with what happened to the supply chain. They were caught off guard with how their fellow Americans would respond. Well, if Americans can't handle the coronavirus, can they handle what could be thrown at us by our national enemies? Well, tonight, are Russia and China preparing for war with the United States? Are they preparing for a 2.0 Pearl Harbor? Look at this quote by Ben Franklin. By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. Many people weren't aware or prepared for something like the coronavirus, but are Americans ready and prepared for something even more? You know the old art of war? Sun Tzu, quote, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle, end quote. Do we know America's enemies? Are we aware of who China and Russia are? Look at this quote. This comes from August 13th, 2017. Then CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Of course, he's now the Secretary of State, but in 2017, as CIA director, he said, quote, Venezuela could very much become a risk for the United States of America. The Cubans are there. The Russians are there. The Iranians, Hezbollah are there. There's something that has a risk of getting to a very, very bad place. So America needs to take this very seriously, end quote. Look who's there, folks. The Cubans are there. The Russians are there. The Iranians are there. Hezbollah are there. You doubt me? Here's another one. Los Angeles Times. Even the liberal Los Angeles Times reported this week. U.S. indicts Venezuelan President Maduro on drug trafficking charges. Notice the date, March 26, 2020, this week. Folks, what is that for? What are they preparing to do, if anything? Keep your eye on Venezuela. But you remember last week I shared with you the audio and video clip of 4-star Admiral, Navy 4-star Admiral Craig Fowler, testifying before Senate Select Committee, March 11th, 2020, warning that China is, in quote, our backyard, that China is, quote, in our neighborhood, end quote. Well, folks, they are, and they're in Venezuela. And now, of course, the Justice Department announces an indictment of drug trafficking on the president of Venezuela. The article says the Trump administration announced sweeping indictments Thursday of Venezuelan President Maduro and some of his associates on federal drug trafficking and related charges, and a major escalation of U.S.-led campaign to topple Maduro and his socialist government. By the way, they also indicted some of the folks in the military and Supreme Court there. Here's another headline. This goes back to 2014. Former State Department official. Terror groups in Venezuela planning to attack the U.S. That's the Epoch Times back in 2014. This is something we've been warning about on our radio show for 10 years. We've been warning about Venezuela. Here's this from that article. The claims that terrorists in Latin America want to attack the United States are credible. There are many terrorist cells operating in Latin America, and Hezbollah has played a strong hand in growing these terror networks. Here's another one. Military.com, August 13th, 2012. Venezuela as Iranian terror route worries U.S. Here's the Heritage Foundation from 2010. State sponsors of terrorism. Time to add Venezuela to the list. Folks, China and Russia are in Venezuela. That's only 1,264 miles as the crow flies from Caracas, Venezuela, northern Venezuela, to Miami. 1,264 miles, but it gets worse. Russia sends 2 nuclear-capable bombers to Venezuela. By the way, I cover this in my documentary Siege and show video clips of these 2 bombers landing there in Venezuela. Nuclear bombers, Russian, landing in Venezuela. 1,264 miles is Caracas, northern Venezuela, to Miami. The article goes on to state the Tu-160 is capable of carrying conventional or nuclear-tipped cruise missiles with a range of 5,500 kilometers or 3,410 miles. Such bombers took part in Russia's campaign in Syria, where they launched conventionally armed Kh-101 cruise missiles for the first time in combat. Codenamed Blackjack by NATO, the massive warplane is capable of flying at a record speed twice exceeding the speed of sound. Russia has upgraded its Tu-160 fleet with new weapons and electronics and plans to produce a modernized version of the bomber. So last week we looked at 10 reasons we believe that Russia and China are preparing for war with Iran. Was the coronavirus one of the steps and processes in helping to collapse America? Let's look at that tonight as well as we did briefly, extensively last week. We'll just touch on it this week. But just to remind you, the 10 points we're covering. 1, the Pentagon is preparing for war with Russia and China. That's number 1 of our 10. The Pentagon is preparing for war with Russia and China. 2, China's failure to contain the coronavirus and allow for intentional spread is a warfare attack. 3, China and Russia rehearsed for war in 2010. 4, China's 2019 strategy was to prepare for war. 5, China and Russia have hacked into America's power grid. 6, China is ramping up their aggressive language and behavior. 7, China and Russia are preparing their people for war against the U.S. with propaganda. 8, China and Russia are setting up military bases and infrastructure in our backyard. 9, while a normal and long-standing practice, China and Russia are testing America's response and gathering intelligence on military and space operations. 10, China and Russia are building advanced military technology and infrastructure. It's on number 10 we'll endeavor to rush off to here as I blow through the other points tonight fast so I can spend time on number 10. Because it's there that we find out they're actually, according to numerous credible reports, including Russian military documents, they're preparing for a Pearl Harbor 2.0 type event. So last week we stopped here. China's failure to contain the coronavirus and allow for intentional spread is a warfare attack. Well, did you see this? U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo calls Chinese Communist Party the central threat of our times. That was back on January 30th, 2020. Well, did you see this headline? Did you see this cartoon, I should say? This was on March 20th. March 20th. This is the China Daily. Go look it up. The China Daily is a paper, an English print paper of the Communist Chinese. This is a Communist Chinese paper, English paper, owned and operated by the Communist Chinese. Here was the cartoon, March 20th, 2020. Look at the virus, the coronavirus, dressed as a cowboy. Notice the finger is on the trigger and it's been fired. Look at the smoke coming out of the end of the barrel. And look at the bull market. The bull has been shot, got its tongue hanging out. Stock markets. They shot our stock markets. They killed the bull market. They killed the economy of Donald Trump in some respects, and they're quite happy about it. And you're telling me they didn't allow this to intentionally spread? Of course, the debate is still whether it came from a level 4 biolab. Was it released on purpose or by mistake? We don't know, but I think we can pretty much conclude once it got out, they let it spread on purpose by delaying to tell people. So it fits in with China's failure to contain the coronavirus and allow for intentional spread. That's a warfare act. How is China planning to use the coronavirus to its advantage? Well, Josh Rogan writes, March 16th, 2020, in Washington, there's a lot of talk about how the coronavirus could increase the push for more economic decoupling with China. But the Chinese government is thinking about it in exactly the opposite way. Beijing is preparing to use the crisis to advance China's economic strategy against us. We better start taking notice. He says they have a post-virus strategy and it's already underway. He's quoting a guy who is the co-founder of Horizon Advisory, a consultancy that tracks Chinese government and economic activity. Josh goes on to write, Horizon issued a new report Sunday drawn from official Chinese government and media sources that spells out how Beijing is planning to use the downturn in Western economies to its benefit. China intends to seek out more foreign direct investment, seize market share in critical industries, and try to stop the West from confronting its bad behavior. After the 2008 financial crisis, Beijing filled the economic void by building up its national champion companies, using huge government subsidies and gross intellectual property theft. 12 years later, and now home to some of the world's largest and most capable firms, China is planning to overproduce various goods to flood the market, increase its market share while Western companies are on their backs. China is also setting itself up to be a haven for foreign capital if its markets bounce back before ours. Number 3 in our list of 10, that China and Russia are preparing for war. 3, China and Russia rehearsed for war in 2018. Here's a headline from 2018. Russia and China are preparing for a nuclear war with their biggest ever war games. Business Insider. What are they talking about? They're talking about Vostok 18. Vostok 18 was a military exercise between Russia and China in the summer of 2018. We deal with it extensively in our 8.5-hour docu-movie Siege. In fact, if you tonight go to siegethemovie.com at the end of our show, you can actually see the video footage of some of the 36,000 tanks, 300,000 troops that took part in this military exercise. You'll see Putin and the Chinese leader there, one of the generals. You'll see them together. This was said to be the largest military exercise in world history between Russia and China. We show footage of this in the documentary Siege, which you can see for free, 1 hour, siegethemovie.com, siegethemovie.com. At this desk, I interviewed Dr. Peter Pry, a former CIA analyst. He's been interviewed by Mark Levin for an hour on Fox News. He sits at this desk and records his TV show that we produce. We produce his weekly radio show at worldviewradio.com. You can watch his TV show at WVW-TV.com. But he sat at this news desk and he said that what Vostok 18 was all about was two things: practicing the new way of warfare and the old way of warfare. The new way of warfare is hacking into our systems, which they did a week before carrying out the military exercise of Vostok 18 with things like Operation Dragonfly and others. And our own governments admitted that Russia and China have indeed hacked into our power grid, as we'll see in a minute. That's the new way of warfare. New way of warfare, as we looked at last night from Communist China in their 1999 document written by 2 Communist Chinese colonels, Unrestricted Warfare. Their new way of warfare they boasted includes cyber hacking and things like EMPs and bioweapons, and how they could use that as a psychological weapon. If you missed last Sunday night's show, you must go watch it. It's had thousands of views on our YouTube channel and on our website. In fact, last month we did 18.6 million stream requests last month, just at WVW-TV, not counting our other platforms. 18.6 million TV requests last month, streaming requests, just at WVW-TV.com. You can watch last week's show where I discussed that document in depth, including China openly bragging in 1999 how they would use these kind of new ways of warfare as a psychological weapon to cause Americans to basically surrender with fear and be paralyzed. And Dr. Peter Pry in this documentary, Siege, which again came out in 2019, December 2019, said that they would try the new way of warfare first, and if it doesn't work, then let the rockets fly. And you know what he says they were practicing in this Vostok 18? A nuclear strike on NATO and America. Well, this is one reason why the Pentagon believes China and Russia are rehearsing for war. And then they had one a few months ago with China, Russia, and Iran. So that's the headline out of Business Insider. It goes on to say Russia and China, the two key threats to the U.S. named in official Pentagon documents, will carry out the biggest ever military drill to reportedly include, there you go, simulations for nuclear warfare. 4, China's 2019 strategy was to prepare for war. Here's the headline. South China Morning Post. China's military priorities for 2019: boost training and prepare for war. The South China Morning Post, by the way, you can get a lot of good information out of them. In some of those papers over there that are constantly dealing with the shenanigans of China, you can get more than you can out of the American papers that seem to be apologizing for China and defending China. Number 5, China and Russia have hacked into America's power grid. I made reference to that. And again, I deal with that extensively in this documentary, Siege. Again, you can watch 1 hour for free at siegethemovie.com. Here's the headline. Even NPR knows this to be true. You say, well, why does he quote, why does he show these screenshots of CNN and NPR and Los Angeles Times and New York Times? Because I want you to know this isn't conspiracy. Even the liberal rags, have to report the truth every now and then. Even a blind squirrel finds an acorn sometimes, right? So I deliberately quote these kind of outlets so you can see that this isn't some right-wing conspiracy, fear-mongering. This is occasionally even reported on by the liberal media. They can't even ignore it. So here's the NPR headline from 2018. Russia hacked U.S. power grid. So what will the Trump administration do about it? Here's a bulletin that was put out by U.S. Department of Homeland Security back in March of 2018. Russian government cyber activity targeting energy and other critical infrastructure sectors. Again, Department of Homeland Security Bulletin, March 2018. Here's a headline, Reuters, 2014. The then National Security Agency chief warns Chinese cyber attacks could shut U.S. infrastructure. The article said, Reuters, Washington, D.C., Dateline, China, probably one or two other countries, have the ability to evade and possibly shut down computer systems of U.S. power utilities, aviation networks, and financial companies. Admiral Mike Rogers, the director of the U.S. National Security Agency, said on Thursday. Do you guys remember who Mike Rogers is? He's the guy, by the way, not only was he the head of NSA, he's now retired, but he's the one that at the end of the Obama administration, while President Donald Trump was president-elect, if you go look it up, the head of the NSA, Mike Rogers, is the one that went to Trump Tower and told President-elect Trump, you're being wiretapped, as Trump put it. You're being spied on. You're being monitored. And you remember the next day, what did he do? Moved his transition team to his golf course over in New Jersey. It was Mike Rogers that did not tell the Obama administration that he was going to go visit with President-elect Trump. He went and did it. I don't know about you, but that sounds like an American hero to me, at least in that incident. And here he is warning, as reported by Reuters, that China or Chinese cyber attacks could shut down U.S. infrastructure. Well, my friends, again, if Americans weren't prepared for a virus, they didn't have enough masks, ventilators, gloves, smocks. If they didn't have enough of this kind of stuff, do you really think the American government is prepared for a temporary blackout from cyber hacking? How about an EMP, which could be a really long time? But what if the power just went out with a cyber hack for a week or two or a month? What do you think would happen? Are Americans prepared? Or are they just, again, waiting for the government to solve their problems for them? The article in the Washington Free Beacon, published in 2016 by very credible author, columnist Bill Gertz, said, it's only a matter of when, not if, we're going to see a nation, state, group, or actor engage in destructive behavior against critical infrastructure in the United States. Now, he's quoting Mike Rogers. He's quoting Mike Rogers, the former head of the NSA, Bill Gertz. Number 6, China's ramping up their aggressive language and behavior. Have you noticed that? Even in the middle of the coronavirus, China is ramping up their aggressive language and behavior. Here's a headline, Breitbart. China threatens EMP attack in South China Sea. This was just last week, folks. While we're dealing with the coronavirus, China threatens an EMP attack in South China Sea. Dateline, March 17th, 2020. The article said, quote, Chinese state media on Tuesday, rather unsubtly, decided this would be a good time to chat with a panel of, quote, experts, end quote, about the possibility of using an electromagnetic pulse weapon, or EMP, against American ships that enter portions of the South China Sea illegally claimed by Beijing, end quote. Don't you think that's pretty provocative behavior? Doesn't sound like a country that's interested in getting along and going along. That's pretty provocative behavior, right? And by the way, why are they building so many man-made islands? Because they are trying to take advantage of international law. International law says outside of your physical property or nation, within so many miles, that's your territory. Outside of the limit, whatever those miles, I think it's 12. Outside of that 12 miles is international waters. Inside those 12 miles, that's your territory. Well, China's building all of these islands. They're bringing in dirt and they're building islands in the South China Sea. Why are they doing this? Not only is this to give them some bases for operation with their Navy and Air Force, but it also allows them to control the shipping coming through that very important region. But also, underneath the South China Sea, is reportedly lots and lots of oil. And China wants to be able to declare it is theirs because it would therefore be inside their boundaries because they have built these islands. You see what's going on? And that's why Breitbart says illegally claimed by Beijing. Here's another headline. It's time to practice social and economic distancing from China. Americans are practicing social distancing to stop the spread of the coronavirus that the Chinese regime's lies and mismanagement unleashed onto the world. It may also be time to start practicing social and economic distancing from China as well. China's dictatorship bears ultimate responsibility for the pandemic lockdown that is crushing our economy. As one report that's put out said that if China had acted just 3 weeks earlier to contain the virus rather than suppress information about it, quote, the number of coronavirus cases could have been reduced by 95% and its geographic spread limited, end quote. This is why I say that I believe they allowed it to spread on purpose. He goes on to say, and this is, by the way, is Mark Thiessen, he goes on to report, but the ensuing crisis has also exposed just how dependent we become on China in key sectors of our economy. Case in point, in recent days, the Chinese state news agency warned that if the Trump administration is not careful, China could ban pharmaceutical exports and plunge the United States, quote, into the hell of a new coronavirus pneumonia epidemic, end quote. Now, see, what is the point we're on here? The point we're on is that they're ramping up their language. They're ramping up their language. That's the point that we're on. China is ramping up their aggressive language and their aggressive behavior. They're not only threatening to strike our ships in the South China Sea with an EMP, they're also threatening to stop what? Shipping us our drugs. The threat is real. China supplies more than 90% of antibiotics used here. It also produces many other drugs and biologics that Americans depend on, including heparin, HIV/AIDS medications, chemotherapy drugs, antidepressants, and treatments for Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, epilepsy, and Parkinson's disease. Rosemary Gibson, author of Chain RX, subtitled Exposing the Risk of America's Dependence on China for Medicine, told the New York Times this month, quote, if China shut the door on exports of core components to make our medicines, within months, our pharmacy shelves would become bare and our healthcare system would cease to function, end quote. And yet, China is ramping up the language. That's the kind of thing you do when you're preparing for war. That's the kind of thing you do when you're trying to gain psychological advantage over your opponent. That's the thing you do when you're trying to send a message also to your people, which is number 7. China and Russia are preparing their people for war against the U.S. with propaganda. Let me read that again. China and Russia are preparing their people for war against the U.S. with propaganda. This is a picture of Konstantin Priovavinsky. He's a former KGB officer, featured in my documovie. He now lives in the suburbs of outside of Washington, D.C. And I interviewed him on radio for an hour, and excerpts of that are included in my documovie, Siege. Again, you can watch a whole hour for free at siegethemovie.com. You can order it at siegethemovie.com. The clear and present danger is pushing America to the brink of a Marxist Islamic revolution, civil war, World War III, and globalism. So much of the things that now Americans are interested in was in this documentary that came out in December 2019, and we're shipping. We're shipping every week. Lots of things going out every week. So if you're shut in and bored and want to do something productive, watch 8.5 hours of this. SiegeTheMovie.com is where you can order it or watch the first hour free. SiegeTheMovie.com. Let me just quickly say, if you appreciate what we're doing here and you want more information, I'll send you my movie Sabotage, which is 6 hours. I'll send that to you for free. And I'll send you my book Marxianity for free. This is 300 pages. It's subtitled How the Evangelical Deep State and Their Useful Idiots Are Merging Marxism and Christianity Through Social Justice, White Privilege, Cultural Marxism, Illegal Immigration, Interfaith Dialogue, and more. I'll send you this 300-page book for free and my 6-hour documentary Sabotage if you join our Situation Room, where we archive over 1,600 TV shows, thousands of radio shows, ebooks, audiobooks, transcripts, and more. I'll send these to you for free. If you join at the 1-year, 2-year, or 3-year rate, is my way of saying thank you for joining, for educating yourself, for getting information, but also for supporting what we're doing, because the ways you support us are 2 ways. 1, through a tax-deductible contribution at WVW-Foundation.com. You can send a check to our mailing address on our website as well, WVW-Foundation.com. The second way, and again, that is tax-deductible, the second way you can support us is by being a member of our VIP club. our Situation Room that we started in February of 2006. And I referenced my book a while ago, A Grave Influence, and that is there in there as an ebook. All my books, about 14 of them I guess now, are in there as ebooks. So you don't need to buy them. They're already there under the library tab. But if you join at WVW-TV.com/subscription, WVW-TV.com/subscription, I'll send you these for free. If you haven't received yours yet, be patient. We will get them out. We got a list. We got labels. We're working our way through it. But you will get it. WVW-TV.com/subscription. But I did interview Konstantin Provinsky for Siege. And in that interview, he says that Americans think, many of them, that Russia is their friend. He said, no. No, he says, it's quite known in Russia that America are not friends of Russia. It's very well known if you watch the news and the TV in Russia that North Korea is Russia's friends, that America is Russia's enemy. He said that. You can see it or hear it right here, siegethemovie.com. This former KGB agent says everyone knows in Russia that watches television and reads the media, the Russian government, the Kremlin, make it very clear. North Korea is the friend of Russia. America is the enemy. By the way, Konstantin Provinsky was very good friends with Alexander Levinko, the former KGB agent that knew Putin very, very well. He's the one that you've seen the picture of with his bald head in the hospital because he was writing books and giving speeches exposing the real Putin, what his agenda really was, and how he was funding and training some of the leading terrorists around the globe, using the Islamists as his junkyard dogs to stir up things and keep the price of oil high so he could use that in part to rebuild Mother Russia. Well, unfortunately, Alexander went to a little meeting in Great Britain with some Russians who slipped plutonium into his tea, and he died. Konstantin was good friends with him. Talked to him on a daily basis, he said. You'll hear the extensive interview in the documentary Siege. But again, the point is, China and Russia are preparing their people for war with propaganda. And this former KGB agent said, as you can hear it yourself, everyone in Russia knows, if you just watch the TV news, read the paper, North Korea is their friend, America is their enemy. Here's the New York Post. Chinese official blames coronavirus outbreak on U.S. military. Again, this is where they're preparing their people for dealing with the enemy of America. The Chinese official blames the coronavirus outbreak on U.S. military. This also comes from military.com. In late January, a Chinese military website, which is owned and funded by Chinese Ministry of Defense, claimed that the coronavirus had been specifically engineered by U.S. to target the people of Han Chinese ancestry. The Han represents some 99% of China's population. Supposedly, according to this website, the virus was introduced into Wuhan by American servicemen participating in the Military World Games in October 2019. The report claimed that the, quote, poor performance of the American athletes, end quote, was evidence that they were not, in fact, athletes, but, quote, biowarfare operatives, end quote. Did you know that was going around? This is propaganda preparing their people for war. 8, China and Russia are setting up military bases and infrastructure in our backyard. China and Russia are setting up military bases and infrastructure in our backyard. We watched last week a video clip, again, of 4-star Admiral Craig Fowler, Senate Select Committee testimony, March 11th, 2020, warning China are in our backyard, in our neighborhood in Central America. There's a screenshot from the testimony. We played the clip last week in part 1, now posted at WVW-TV.com and on our YouTube channel. Here's the New York Times. From a space station in Argentina, China expands its reach in Latin America. It said in the middle of all this, China also dispatched a team to Argentina to discuss something that had nothing to do with currency fluctuations. Beijing's ambitions in space. The Chinese wanted a satellite tracking hub on the other side of the globe before the launch of an expedition to the far side of the moon, which never faces the Earth. If successful, the mission scheduled to launch this year will be a milestone in space exploration, potentially paving the way for the extraction of helium-3, which some scientists believe could provide a revolutionary clean source of energy. China's Satellite Launch and Tracking Control General, a division of the country's armed forces, settled on this windswept 494-acre patch in Argentina's province. Flanked by mountains and far from population centers, the site offered an ideal vantage point for Beijing to monitor satellites and space missions around the clock. All the while, China has been discreetly carrying out a far-reaching plan of its own across Latin America, says New York Times, July 28, 2018. It has vastly expanded trade, bailed out governments, built enormous infrastructure projects, strengthened military ties, and locked up tremendous amounts of resources, hitching the fate of several countries in the region to its own. Perhaps more significantly, China has issued tens of billions of dollars in commodities-backed loans across the Americas, giving it claim over a large share of the region's oil, including 90% of Ecuador's reserves for years. China has also made itself indispensable by rescuing embattled governments and vital state-controlled companies in countries like Venezuela and Brazil, willing to make big bets to secure its place in the region. The Los Angeles Times reported January 25, 2010, over the decade ending in 2016, China loaned Venezuela approximately $62 billion, much of which Caracas could repay with oil. Moscow in the last several years gave Venezuela $17 billion in loans and investment, and in December, the two governments signed a deal in which Russia will invest $6 billion in Venezuela's oil and gold sectors. Russia, unlike China, is more interested in expanding its military presence and setting up a beachhead in the Americas and within spitting distance of the United States. Last year, two of Russia's most modern nuclear-capable bombers arrived in Caracas for a short visit. Talks about building a Russian military presence in Venezuela began in 2016, a move that alarmed the U.S. The arrival of the bombers drew sharp criticism from Washington. The Russian and Venezuelan people should see this for what it is: two corrupt governments squandering public funds and squelching liberty and freedom while their people suffer, said State Department Secretary Michael Pompeo. For Russia's investment and military saber-rattling about protecting Venezuela has always been about sowing strength in America's neighborhood. Venezuela owes Moscow $3 billion for arms purchases, end quote. So you see, my friends, China and Russia are spreading around the money, buying up companies, buying up resources, and making sure that they have ways to launch from these Central American nations in a time of war, which is why the four-star Admiral Craig Fowler said on video before that Senate Select Committee, March 11, 2020, this is extremely troubling to him. Number 9, while a normal and long-standing practice, China and Russia are testing America's response and gathering intelligence on military and space operations. Now, again, this is a long-standing practice. This is normal. They do it. We do it. But it, again, tells you where they're at, particularly when you read articles like this. Daily Mail, February 6, 2020. The real hunt for Red October, major U.S. operation to track deadly Russian subs, lasted for weeks off the East Coast, but found nothing. As U.S. Navy warns, the waters are no longer a, quote, safe haven, end quote. The U.S. Navy has spent weeks trawling the North Atlantic in the hunt for a deadly Russian submarine that was known to have deployed into the waters off the east coast of the United States. The Project 885 Yasin class guided missile submarine, Severodvinsk, how you say that, is built from the very latest in Russian technology and was thought to be just a few hundred miles away from the North American coastline in the fall of 2019. Such was the worry of the U.S. military. The search involved a large number of Navy submarines, ships, and maritime patrol aircraft, all of which proved fruitless after the sub remained undetected throughout, according to the dive. The vessel, which can carry up to 40 caliber missiles, by the way, we're going to get into these caliber missiles in a minute, among other weapons, is known for having an especially low acoustic signature and proves especially difficult to pick up on all manner of sophisticated detection equipment, including sonar. So there you go. The real hunt for the real October, a hunt for the real Red October. They kind of go into a black hole, if you will, and you can't see them. You can't hear them. And yet they're right off our coast. And of course, they're involved in practices, the kind of thing that is normally done between the two nations, whether we're talking Russia and America or China and America. But again, it tells you what they're doing because they're also collecting data as they listen. Russian spy ship off U.S. coast operating in unsafe manner, officials say. A Russian spy ship has returned to the international waters off the southeastern coast of the United States and is operating in what two U.S. officials told CNN is an unsafe manner. All right, here's another one. U.S. Canadian fighter jets intercept Russian reconnaissance aircraft near Alaska coast, video shows. This again was March 11th, 2020. Now to number 10. China and Russia are building advanced military technology and infrastructure. China and Russia are building advanced military technology and infrastructure. This, my friends, is where we get into Pearl Harbor 2.0. But first this. Russia builds huge underground shelters in Moscow as it prepares for nuclear war with the West. Did you read that? Russia builds huge underground shelters in Moscow as it prepares for nuclear war with the West. Sub-headline, Russia has built massive nuclear bunkers capable of providing shelter to Moscow's 12 million people. As Vladimir Putin gears up for a devastating nuclear war with the West. Can I ask you something? Where are our nuclear shelters? Where's the nuclear shelter in your town for thousands and thousands of people? Where are those spread throughout America? Go do your own due diligence and look at the report of the massive underground shelters that are being built by Russia. Here's another headline. China has built 7 new military bases in South China Sea, U.S. Navy commander says. Here's another headline. The Guardian. Images show construction of China's 3rd aircraft carrier, think tank says. Boy, they've got advanced aircraft carriers. You should see these things. Now let's talk about Pearl Harbor 2.0. There's a great report you can go find online. If you search it, PDF, print it out. We've talked about it, done radio on it now for a few years. We started talking about it in 2018 when this report was released by Mary Fanning and Alan Jones. Again, you can find it online, put out by the Center for Security Policy. Russia's Pearl Harbor 2.0. Here is a picture of that. Now, this comes from the Russian Federation state-owned enterprise, this company that exports what is known as the Club K car. By the way, I talk about the Club K car extensively in Sabotage, and I interview former CIA operations officer and broadcast partner whose new show will be launching soon. She's already filmed 12 shows from this news desk. Former CIA operations officer Claire Lopez. She's featured extensively in the docu-movie Sabotage about these Club K cars I'm about to tell you about. So we've been talking about this and doing radio and TV for a while. But it further shows you how indeed Russia and China openly, by their own admission, are preparing for war with the United States. Should America consider the coronavirus that was deliberately spread? I mean, was it deliberately put out there? I can't say that. But I think we can say it was deliberately spread when they're not telling us. They're not getting in contact with us that could have stopped a lot of this. Is this an act of war? What about the cartoon that shows the coronavirus laughing and smiling and they've shot our stock market? What about the 1999 document by 2 Chinese colonels of the Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, that boasted of doing this all the way back in 99 as psychological warfare? Well, here we have Russia. Russia's own 100% Russian-owned exporter of the Club K car. They put out this picture. What does it show? It shows a cargo container lifting up on a rail car, shooting missiles, lifting up on a semi-truck, shooting missiles, going on a freighter ship and shooting at what? U.S. aircraft. This is their picture. This is the Club K car. Looks like a normal shipping container you'd find on the back of a semi-truck or rail car. But with the push of a button or a command from a satellite, up pops 4 silos that can shoot off these cruise missiles that can be rigged with nuclear missiles, biological, or chemical. In fact, from this paper by the Center for Security Policy, we read, translations from a Russian defense journal and from a secret Iranian military handbook suggested that Russia and Iran have developed a Pearl Harbor 2.0 plan to sink the entire U.S. Navy fleet as part of a coordinated attack, asymmetrical attack against the United States and U.S. military base around the world. The plan is to launch Russian-caliber cruise missiles from submarines, freighter ships, and Trojan Horse Club K container missile systems, intermodal cargo containers that can be smuggled into U.S. ports and moved into the U.S. interior aboard trains and semi-trucks. Folks, it gets worse. Hang on. In 2015, the Russian journal, translated National Defense, outlined a plan to, quote, hit them in their ports, end quote. Did you hear what I just said? A Russian journal, translated National Defense, outlined a plan to, quote, hit them in their ports, end quote. This is why it would be called Pearl Harbor 2.0. With caliber cruise missiles that could sink entire U.S. Navy fleets docked in ports across the United States, Europe, and the Middle East. The journal published a paper written by this Russian called Russian Navy's Long Arm Caliber Missile Family. It was translated from Russian. The article continues, thanks to the Caliber cruise missiles, nuclear and conventional submarines will no longer have to change ship targets. This is right from their own report, folks, Russian report. They will no longer have to change ship targets all over the ocean, but strike them in their ports, attacking from long ranges. They can now attack a wide range of land targets from directions poorly protected by air defenses. By the way, this is why the four-star general in charge of NORTHCOM before the March 11th, 2020 Senate Select Committee said we need more radar up on the north, up by Alaska, to give us more of a reference of what's coming in. By the way, when I covered this on my radio show and TV show in 2018, a friend of mine who's in military intelligence with some 600 agents answering to him, he did not know this. He found out about this through us, through our broadcast. He went and verified it. Now, why does he not know that? You think, well, he's in military intelligence, has 600 agents answering to him, or officers, they're in the intel community. Why would he know this? Because they all specialize. Just like there are doctors that specialize, there are guys in the military and military intelligence and the intelligence community that all specialize in their given area. This was not his. He's involved in areas related to satellites and other things, collection of data. But after he heard it on our radio show, this Navy officer with 600 people under his command in a highly secure national Navy facility began to print out this vetted document. He went and vetted it, began to pass it out to his staff, as well as making sure that members of Congress and military officials up the chain were aware of this. Shockingly, many of them were not. So again, this is the service we provide. Not only to you, the American people, so you can let your elected officials know, because I bet you a lot of you walking up to your congressman when he's home would say, hey, are you aware of the Club K car manufactured in Russia and owned by and marketed by a fully Russian-owned exporter? The Club K car, are you aware of that? Hey, by the way, are you aware that one of the families that is involved in this has been given a multi-year contract to run the Port Canaveral in Florida and the port in Wilmington, Delaware? Yeah, you heard me right. One of the families involved in this business, who is tied back to Saddam Hussein, their family's shipping container company has now been given a multi-year contract to Port Canaveral in Florida, a shipping container company where these things can come in, and Wilmington, Delaware, and they're looking to give them more. I deal with it all in the documentary Sabotage. But the Russian document goes on to say, this also applies to attack on surface ships. In the near future, Russian submarine missile boats and surface ships will be able to hold at risk all important sites in Europe and the Middle East, while the nuclear subs will have the U.S. as their potential targets. We will believe that the idea of placing calibers in standard 40-foot containers, that's cargo containers, the Caliber K system, also known as the Club K car, installed on civilian ships, including riverine ones. So they put it on rivers, folks. Such concealed floating arsenal can operate on seas and rivers unnoticed. Club S export version is also enjoying success. It has been installed on more than 20 diesel-electric submarines delivered to Algeria, Vietnam, India, and China. Iranian soldiers are casting covetous gazes at them. The article by the, now again, that's Russian, that was in that report by the Center for Security Policy quoting the Russian document. Now back to quoting Center for Security Policy. The Club K's Caliber cruise missiles can deliver nuclear, EMP, chemical, biological, and conventional payloads. Submarines can also launch Caliber cruise missiles. Russia and other U.S. adversaries could smuggle Club K cargo container missile systems units through U.S. ports, such as Port Canaveral and the Port of Wilmington. Club K units look identical to standard intermodal shipping containers. Dr. Joseph King is the former chief of the National Security Section, Department of Homeland Security's New York City office. In an exclusive interview with these reporters, Dr. King stated, quote, the detailed information that has been amassed regarding Project Pelican makes it clear that the threats to our ports and terminals are first line of defense. Our first line of defense, and the corruption and criminal conduct in these conspiracies surpass the scope of Iran-Contra and Whitewater affairs combined, end quote. What's he talking about? How this even came about? How the waivers were given, the same time that the Uranium One deal went through, this deal went through. The same time the boards that were supposed to be stopping this kind of thing were shut down to allow Uranium One to go through, this also went through. I detail it extensively in the documentary Sabotage that included also a Muslim Brotherhood operative involved in this as well. Dr. King elaborated, I find it mind-boggling that this Byzantine attack on our national security has swept under the rug by the previous administration, the Obama administration. I hope that someone in the Trump administration will pursue this dangerous and criminal attack on our ports and terminals and ultimately our national security so that, unlike Churchill, we will not have to fight them on our beaches, end quote. This is a U.S. naval document about the Russian Navy. This comes from published by the Office of Naval Intelligence. Office of Naval Intelligence put out in 2015, the end of 2015, the Russian Navy historic transition. So I read this document, and guess what they talk about in there? The same thing. They talk about the same thing in this document right here, and that America had better be aware of the advanced technology of Russia. We're talking sixth-generation warfare. Sixth-generation warfare. In my documentary, Siege, I go into the fifth and sixth-generation warfare technology of Russia. And so even the Navy is putting out declassified documents to let the American people see this and to warn them of what is happening. Now again, what many people are not aware of, these Club K cars can come into the U.S. with these 4 cruise missiles. They'll lift up the lid with a command, even can come from a satellite. And have they been put all over the U.S. already? In fact, some of our national enemies, the nation states that hate us, have bragged that they could strike the American people. They have said recently that they are near and close to us and could strike, that they are near and close. My friends, I've talked to active and retired intelligence people. I've talked to active military intelligence people. They have no way of knowing whether these are already here, as Russia has bragged in their defense magazines have been translated into English. Are they already here? Well, one way to get them here would be to put them through our ports. Well, what would happen if we turned our ports over to a family that was connected back to Saddam Hussein and to Russia? Listen to this. Here's a description of a TV show I did with my friend, the late Phil Haney, November 2017. Here's the description. Dr. Jaffer was Saddam Hussein's nuclear scientist and now has access to Florida's Port Canaveral cargo container terminal with a 35-year lease. Jaffer and his family own Gulftainer, a company that works in joint venture with Russian state-owned exporter of the Club K cargo container system that can conceal and then launch 4 cruise missiles from a command off a satellite. Yeah, you heard me right. Dr. Jaffer's family, he and his family, have been given a 35-year lease to Cape Canaveral in Florida and now in Wilmington, Delaware. I think that one there is 50 years. I go on to describe in the November 2017 TV show with Phil Haney, former DHS officer, Dr. Jaffer created what is called the beach ball, that is a miniaturized nuclear weapon. Dr. Jaffer has also sought help from North Korea on missile projects. The Club K container cruise missile could be fitted with nuclear, chemical, biological, or EMP weapons. Northcom NORAD officials admit that the U.S. does not have a way to track the Club K cars that may have already been brought into the U.S. and positioned around the nation. Because again, that's not the way our system was set up. It wasn't set up. It was set up to look for missiles coming from such places as the former Soviet Union, not right off our shores that close, certainly not inside a Pearl Harbor type event. Have they already come in? Have they been moved around and stationed? By the way, did you know that Venezuela sold about 49% of its Citgo gas company to Russia? They needed money, so they sold about 49% of it to Russia a few years ago. My friend, the late Phil Haney, DHS officer, warned us about that in the TV show from November 2017. He brought it up right live on the show. And he said, hey, you want to add another layer to this? Go check out Venezuela selling about half of their Citgo company to Russia. Well, did you know that in Citgo, there are a lot of Citgo gas stations. Those are independently owned. We don't have to worry about those. The problem is the terminals. The terminals and the refineries. We're talking about refineries in Illinois, Louisiana, and Texas, and then a bunch of terminals up and down the East Coast. Well, that'd be kind of natural to bring cargo container systems into there, would it not? Well, how easy would it be if you now have Dr. Jaffer's Gulftainer company, who's in direct relationship with that company, which is fully exported and manufactured out of Russia, and the exporter is fully Russian-owned, and Dr. Jaffer has he has a relationship back to Saddam Hussein, and now his family's company has access in controlling Port Canaveral in Florida and Wilmington, Delaware. It's almost too hard to believe, but it's all documented in my documentary Sabotage, which again, I'll send you for free along with my book, Marxianity, if you join our subscription club at WVW-TV.com/subscription. But how easy would it be to get those Club K containers into those ports, then disseminate them to the terminals of Citgo up and down the East Coast? Could that be used as cover? I'm just asking a question. I'm not making statements. I'm asking questions. I don't have answers to these questions. They're beyond my pay grade. But my friends, there are many inside the deep state of Washington that are ignoring all this. The same way they've ignored the bioweapons and the chemicals and are not prepared for a virus, many of them continue to deny the dangers of an EMP. We could harden our national power grid for $2 billion. Harden our national infrastructure power grid for $2 billion. And do it in about 2 years. But we just spent over $2.2 trillion, or about a little over $2 trillion on this bill last week. Some of it which may be necessary to take care of workers, since the government's shutting them all down. But you've got money going to the Kennedy Center, for Pete's sake. And I hear a sunscreen company? And who else? The waste. And for $2 billion, we could harden our grid. You know why it doesn't happen? Because the deep state inside the intelligence community, as Dr. Peter Price so eloquently lays out from this desk, they don't think this is a threat. And by the way, I think some of them have infiltrated the deep state that are actually doing bidding for China and Russia, just as was happening back in the 50s, where agents of the former Soviet Union were penetrating our key government facilities and agencies, including all the way into the White House. So do you really think they're going to take seriously the Club K car when you got Muslim Brotherhood people involved? And you're giving up these ports and these contracts to Dr. Jaffer and his Gulf Tanner family? You see, this is serious. Are they preparing for war? Yes. Are we? Apparently we are, but we're apparently not prepared for the war that could be right here inside our own borders. Are you aware of this? Are you prepared for this? Because guess what? Many Americans weren't prepared for a virus. The toilet paper went flooding off the shelves. Let me tell you something. Toilet paper will be the least of our worries should China and Russia decide to carry out a war against America and do it with a Pearl Harbor 2.0 type scenario that they're bragging about. Again, please note, I'm quoting their Russian translated journals, military journals. This is serious. It's real. This is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We must stop sitting around waiting for the government officials to figure it out, because they won't, many of them. Many of them have been compromised. They're educated beyond their intelligence. They are educated fools, many of them. It is we, the American people, that must be vigilant, for the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We must be the ones to lift up the clarion call and demand from our elected officials who work for us to take these threats seriously, because if they aren't aware of and prepared for a virus, they surely aren't prepared for a Pearl Harbor 2.0 type scenario. Now, are they? Now, again, this is a service we bring to you, not to scare you or to panic you, but to cause you to understand our responsibility and our constitutional republic. As I said, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And so the people must demand our elected officials that work for us take seriously the first responsibility of government, security and protection. Folks, where else are you hearing this kind of program? Where else are you hearing this kind of research? This is one of the few places you're going to get this. Now again, this coming Wednesday night, we'll have a whole hour at 8 p.m. Central Time Wednesday night on this document that has just been released, and we need to invite and ask respectfully for President Trump and his administration to shred it, that is calling for drafting America's daughters. Also calls for a conscription-type program promoted by William James, who I'll tell you about on Wednesday night, to turn our kids into little social justice warriors through a mandatory volunteerism of national service. Now, again, if you appreciate this broadcast, there are two ways to support us. Tax-deductible contribution at WVWFoundation.com, WVWFoundation.com, or by joining our Situation Room and having access to over 1,600 TV shows just like this, ebooks, audiobooks, transcripts, and more. If you join at the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year rate, I'll send you Sabotage and the book, Marxianity. You can sign up at WVW-TV.com. WVW-TV.com/subscription, WVW-TV.com/subscription. Folks, I just crammed 2 hours of information into 1 hour. I hope you appreciate it. I hope you'll share it with your friends. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you for telling your friends about our broadcast. And we look forward to talking to you at 1 p.m. Central Time on the radio tomorrow at worldviewradio.com/live. And then get ready for Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Central Time on Drafting America's Daughters and mandatory brainwashing under the guise of national service. Till next time, I'm Brannon Howse. Thanks for watching. Take care.